I'm Emily, a 60-year-old housewife. Last year, my husband retired, and although we've been enjoying our time together, I felt it was unproductive to do nothing at home. Recently, I took up a part-time cleaning job in the mornings. I want to work and earn money while my body still allows, and working outside allows me to interact with various people, helping alleviate loneliness. At the cleaning job, there were many people around my age, and I could engage in conversations about various topics. Some, like me, had too much time on their hands, while others were busy with 10 grandchildren. There was never a shortage of conversation topics, and I always enjoyed my time at work. Back home, we had an abundance of bell peppers and eggplants in the garden, and someone kindly shared some with me. I expressed my gratitude, feeling happy to receive such generosity. I have 2 children of my own. My eldest son, John, works for a major automobile manufacturer. He married Rose 6 years ago, and they now have a 5-year-old daughter, Julia, who was born with a disability in her legs and lives in a wheelchair. Initially, finding a nursery school for her was challenging, and I often took care of her. Despite her initial loneliness, Julia now looks forward to seeing me, with her big round eyes and adorable curly brown hair. My daughter, Erin, moved abroad after graduating high school to attend university in the UK. She married a British man and now resides in New York. I'm proud of how well she's grown up, and my life has been quite peaceful. However, recently, I've been facing a certain problem concerning my eldest son and his wife. After finishing work one day, I found several missed calls from my son. When I called back, he explained that both he and Rose were busy with work and couldn't look after Julia. While it's fine to help out, I had just finished work and couldn't get there immediately. It would take at least 30 minutes. Despite this, my son quickly agreed and said, "Okay, see you in 30 minutes." Lately, I've been receiving frequent calls from my son asking me to take care of Julia. Even on Rose's days off, she often leaves Julia with me, citing the challenges of caring for a child in a wheelchair. Understanding the physical demands, I try to be supportive. On this particular day, Rose had to leave for work due to colleagues falling sick with a cold. I headed to my son's house, and when I rang the doorbell, Rose came out, apologizing for the sudden request. She explained that 2 people at work had called in sick, and she really had to go. Despite the unexpected situation, I reassured her that I would look after Julia so she could focus on her work. She thanked me and headed off to work, leaving me to care for Julia. The increasing frequency of these calls from my son was becoming a cause for concern. However, I also found myself feeling a certain discomfort towards Rose. Her job is supposed to be in a restaurant, and typically, such establishments have strict rules regarding makeup, hair color, and nails. Lately, I observed that Rose's makeup had become heavier, her hair color brighter, and she even wore subtle nail polish. While not all restaurants prohibit certain grooming practices, some may have rules in place, especially if the job involves serving food. Perhaps my way of thinking is outdated, but I couldn't help muttering to myself about the changes I noticed. One day, when Julia greeted me, I was taken aback to see a large bandage beside her eye. Concerned, I asked her what happened, and she explained that she fell from her wheelchair while trying to reach for something. Despite her smiling demeanor, she appeared pale, raising my worry about a potential head injury. I decided to inquire with my son about Julia's injury. He informed me that a butterfly flew into the room while Rose was doing laundry, and Julia fell from her wheelchair while trying to chase it. Surprised by the explanation, I questioned whether Julia, who I thought didn't like insects, would really chase after a butterfly. My son dismissed it, saying that girls her age change their minds frequently. Worried about Julia's well-being, I suggested taking her to the hospital, but my son brushed off the idea, stating that it would heal on its own and only required attention if she threw up or fainted. Concerned, I wondered if he truly grasped the severity of his daughter's injury and potential consequences. In an effort to care for Julia, I reassured her, urging her to inform me if she felt sick. I even offered to take her to the hospital right away. However, my son, citing his busy work schedule, hung up without expressing much concern for his daughter's injury or the possibility of lasting effects. Realizing that nothing had been prepared for Julia's meal, I checked the kitchen and found it empty. Looking into the fridge, I discovered a lack of food. Determined to care for Julia, I proposed a trip to the nearby supermarket. I promised to push her wheelchair and suggested buying ingredients for an omelette, as she had expressed a desire for it. The short walk to the supermarket was not a hassle for me, and Julia's eyes sparkled with excitement as we entered the store. She eagerly looked around, expressing her delight at the abundance of delicious things. "I haven't been out much recently, so this is fun," Julia exclaimed. Curious, she asked, "What about you, Grandma? What have you been doing?" When I posed the question, Julia briefly averted her eyes, suggesting there might be something she felt hesitant to share. "Lately, both Dad and Mom have been busy with work, so we don't get to go out much." Julia's voice was soft, carrying a hint of sadness. Recognizing her loneliness, I offered, "If Grandma is okay, I can take you out anytime." Julia's face lit up at the prospect, and she eagerly agreed. Upon returning home, I decided to treat Julia to an omelette, a dish I used to make often for my own children. She devoured the first one quickly, prompting me to make a second. I marveled at where all that food was going in her small body, but felt genuinely glad to see her eat so much. Around 8 p.m., my son arrived home, apologizing for my prolonged stay. As I prepared to leave, I reminded him to spend more time with Julia, recounting her earlier comment about not going out much with Rose. I left with the hope that my son would take my words to heart. After that day, however, I found it increasingly difficult to see Julia, despite my attempts to share some mandarins and reconnect with my son and his wife. Both of them cited being busy with work, abruptly ending our calls. The calls I used to receive for help or support became a distant memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that I might have said or done something to upset them. But the truth eluded me. 3 months passed since I last saw Julia, and the seasons changed from summer to autumn. In the midst of having tea with coworkers at a family restaurant after work, my phone rang. Surprisingly, it was a call from my eldest son. Breaking the silence after such a long time, I hurriedly answered the phone, and a sense of concern filled me as my colleagues watched me intently. "Oh, Mom, sorry for the sudden request, but are you free the day after tomorrow?" My son's voice on the other end revealed a request rather than an emergency. "The day after tomorrow? I don't have anything special. It's my day off." "Really?" I replied, relieved that nothing was wrong. My son explained, "Actually, Rose and I are planning a trip abroad, but it seems Julia can't come. Could you, sorry to ask, take care of her for 3 days?" While my initial worry subsided, I assured him, "Of course, that's fine. However, I have work that day, so I'll ask my sister for help. Is that okay?" My son agreed, mentioning that Auntie was fine and leaving the key in the usual place. After hanging up, I let out a sigh of relief, realizing that my concerns about something being wrong were unfounded. It turned out they just needed someone to look after Julia for a few days. I felt happy at the thought of reuniting with my granddaughter after such a long time. 2 days later, I loaded the car with groceries and headed to my son and daughter-in-law's house. Using the key hidden in its usual spot, I entered their home. "Julia, Grandma is here," I called out, but there was no response. Thinking she might be sleeping, I headed to the living room, only to let out a startled sound at the sight that greeted me. Julia was indeed there, but she looked different from the last time I saw her. Thin, pale, unkempt hair, and dirty clothes, as if she hadn't bathed. Shocked by her condition, I hurriedly called my son, demanding an explanation for Julia being bedridden. "Oh, she's been a bit willful lately. I told her she's going to be that way. She needs to take care of herself," my son casually responded. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and became emotional. I questioned their decision to leave their bedridden child and go on an overseas trip, accusing them of being careless as parents. In response, my son unexpectedly lashed out, highlighting the challenges of raising a child with a disability and insinuating that I wouldn't understand. Frustrated, he suggested, "If you're going to complain that much, why don't you take her in? Grandparents can adopt their grandchildren, you know." With those words, he hung up, leaving me enraged at his insensitivity. Seeking support, I consulted my husband, who, upon seeing our changed granddaughter, was shocked and in tears. My sister researched and discovered that grandparents could indeed adopt their grandchildren with the parents' consent. Taking action, we brought Julia to the hospital, preventing any serious complications. After my son and his wife returned from their trip, Julia officially became our adopted child. She thrived under our care, expressing a newfound interest in wheelchair basketball. We discovered a place where they played the sport, and Julia's eyes sparkled with excitement as she expressed her desire to join in the practice. After watching a wheelchair basketball practice, Julia became fascinated with the sport and later joined the junior team. Initially, she struggled to catch the ball and felt frustrated, but her skills improved rapidly through persistent daily practice. For the first 2 years, she could only watch her teammates play from the bench, but her determination paid off in the third year when she finally made it into the regular team. Her excitement was palpable when she received her uniform, signifying her participation in an actual game. Despite concerns about Julia facing a formidable opponent in her first match, our team surprisingly held its own against a strong team. In the second half, Julia had a chance for a free throw, and as the ball left her hands, it went straight into the goal net, igniting cheers from our side of the stands. Encouraged by her successful shot, Julia played assertively, scoring multiple times. The match ended with a victory for Julia's team, a significant achievement for them. Julia's remarkable performance in her first game attracted a large number of reporters, and the event was even broadcasted on local news. Her friends at school admired her, saying, "I saw you on the news yesterday, and you were so cool." Amidst the support, Julia received praise and encouragement, fueling her enthusiasm for practice even more. Her adoptive family, including my husband, sister, and daughter's family, cheered for her with all their might. Even though my daughter's family lived overseas, they made an effort to support Julia whenever possible. Several years later, I received a call from my son John, who had been distant for a long time. At first, I hesitated to answer, but persistent calls compelled me to pick up. In a nonchalant tone, he inquired about Julia's recent success in basketball and even asked about the payment for interviews. Shockingly, he revealed his intention of trying to get money from Julia now that she had become famous. His questions about financial gain from Julia's success made me sick to my stomach. When I refused to comply, he suggested returning Julia to them, referring to her as a golden egg that would earn a lot of signing money in the future. I was appalled by his mercenary attitude, but I firmly rejected the idea, emphasizing that Julia had legally become part of our family through proper procedures. My son's anger flared up, and he demanded Julia's return multiple times. When I asked why, he revealed that they were in significant debt due to their extravagant lifestyle and were attempting to make Julia pay for it. It was inconceivable to let her live with such irresponsible individuals. Julia, who overheard the conversation, reassured me, saying she would never go back to people like them. 2 days later, my son and his wife unexpectedly showed up at Julia's basketball practice, expressing apologies and suggesting they all live together as a family again. Everyone was surprised by their sudden appearance, but Julia, now firm and confident, rejected their proposal. She approached me, giving a weak smile, and said, "I'm here because of Grandpa and Grandma, and the aunts who supported me, so I will never go back to them." As I said my apologies for Julia having to go through such an ordeal, she responded with strength and resilience, asserting her commitment to the family that truly cared for her. "Mommy was always thinking about you, even when we were apart. But now you don't have to feel lonely anymore. Let's live together again, okay?" Julia's biological parents' unexpected remarks stunned everyone around. In the midst of the peculiar atmosphere, Julia stepped forward and politely acknowledged their presence. However, she made it clear that they were no longer her parents. They were now grandma and grandpa. She firmly stated that she didn't want to live with them and requested them to go back. The parents seemed shocked, expecting a different reaction from Julia. Ignoring her refusal, they tried to persuade her. But Julia stood her ground. In a desperate attempt, my son forcibly grabbed Julia's hand, intending to take her to their car. Sensing danger, the coach called the police, and arriving officers took my son and his wife to the station for questioning. Later, the coach called me, explaining the situation, and I learned that they had issued a restraining order against my son and his wife. This prevented them from approaching us, thwarting their ill-conceived plan to take Julia back. According to the police, their debt amounted to a staggering $660,000. Facing difficulties at their workplaces, they both resigned and became temporary employees, frequently changing jobs. Meanwhile, Julia continued to excel in wheelchair basketball, leading her team to victory in tournaments. Offers from professional teams started pouring in, and now she is part of a professional team, practicing harder than ever. As Julia returns home from practice, her face, despite the soreness in her legs and arms, shines brightly. She expresses how tough it was but emphasizes her commitment to contributing to the team as soon as possible. Reflecting on what Julia's life might have been like if she hadn't been taken in that day, I acknowledge the horrifying possibilities. However, I don't regret the courageous decision to adopt her. Julia echoes similar sentiments, reassuring me that it was the right choice. As long as I am able, I want to continue attending her matches, cheering for her, and supporting her in every way possible.